So good morning, everyone. I'll just start off because we have only 1 hour and it's quite. I have brought in a bit of theory as well as some case experiences for you all to understand, and some tools too. So, as Dr. Nagesh Simha said, I'm not going into the basic aspects of communication or anything. I'm just giving you an outline, and I have shared some articles, and I hope Nisha will share this presentation as PDF, and also some articles that I have sent to Arun that people can read, and you can then prepare yourself how to go ahead. So I'll be talking about how you understand conflict and then how you manage it. I want a lot of interaction, so please feel free to put in questions, and also if you want to ask question, please ask yourself to unmute, and then you can ask also. I am going ahead with the presentation. So the objectives of this session is to understand the importance of conflict, especially the resolution of conflict and management. Also to recognize what skill set we should have for conflict management. Especially I'm going to focus on something called self-awareness also, like how do we understand ourselves. So because when we think of conflict, it's about always another person, but we also have to think about ourselves. And then I'll outline some strategies necessary to be involved in successful conversations. So remember, I'm not going to teach everything in detail. I'm going to outline so that I hope that you will read up and we'll have discussion. So why does a conflict occur? Very simply, all of us know what conflicts are, and it is wide ranging, isn't it, over globally on several aspects because of different values and goals. And one side believes in world domination, other doesn't, like in wars, between countries, superpowers. Or probably one side believes that all people should have the same faith and the other side doesn't. So that's also we are seeing. But these are all simple conflicts to understand because we know that there are different values and different belief systems. But it doesn't easily explain why people who work in the same area, like even in like something like even palliative care, where we all work for a single cause, and we have fundamentally similar beliefs and values, but still end up in conflict. And especially so in healthcare settings, because we are, all of us, our intention is to improve the quality of life of patients and their families, to cure them, to give them comfort, to give them as much as peace as possible. But still, when you work together, there is a conflict. So how do we manage that? So why does conflict occur even in healthcare settings? Because people hold very different goals and values. So we should understand that when you work together in a team or with people across you, like you are treating families, you're treating patients with, they come from different cultures, different environments, and they would have different goals or values. Why I'm saying this is often when we start, our care, in terms of treatment or conversations, we assume, or we just think that we are all talking with the same kind of perspective, which isn't so. Each individual brings their own perspective. There is a different goal or different value also. And also, all of us have very different styles of communication, different styles of managing conflict. So in this presentation, what I'm going to do as something new is to introduce styles of conflict. How do you manage differently? So let me go into something very new and very different about self-awareness. Like I said in the beginning, I want all of us to know that we have to be actually aware of ourselves. Self-awareness, and because you're aware of yourself, the tendency to develop your own skills. So when you are aware of yourself, you also know what your limitations are, and you develop your skills accordingly, and you seek for support from your peer and mentors accordingly. So it is not like a general support, but also to understand what I need to do so that you achieve change according to what you actually need. So I'm bringing in two tools here, which are, I'm sure many of you would have heard about it and read about it and been trained also, but just for you all to perceive this after a session maybe. So this is, one is called Johari's window, which is for self-awareness. So, and how do you expand your Johari window? So look at this square here. This is Johari's window. So when you look into it, the square one is something which is very open and free, where you can see that whatever you know about yourself, others also know. So there are some aspects of yourself which you know about yourself and others also know. Okay, when you go into square 2, you see that it is a blind area. See, where you people know something about you, but you don't know yourself. So in that aspect, you have to ask people, what is this? This is a blind area even for yourself. So there is clearly some aspects of yourself which you are not aware of, which you don't know, but others are perceiving. And when you see the square 3, this is the hidden area where, you know, others don't understand what is happening within you, but you know yourself. So there it is about, you want to tell them, okay, self disclosure and exposure. And then you have an unknown area where it is unknown to yourself and unknown to others, where there is a when you start reflecting on yourself, when you start exploring on yourself, when you seek help from your mentors and understand what is actually happening, then there is a shared discovery and there is also self-discovery. And for this, you have to rely on others' observation also. So this is actually your whole self. People don't understand you completely, and even you don't understand you also completely. So you have to understand this, and this Johari's window is applicable to others also. So this is happening to all of us, and so when you know this, when you know what you are aware of this, then you start understanding yourself and another person better. And there is another tool called Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, which is a similar kind of tool which looks into dimensions like extroversion, introversion. So I'm not going to the details, but I'm giving you the tool so that please read about it. You can use in your teams. You can. Many of us have undergone training in this. I have undergone training in delivering this also. So this is a tool which you can help for yourself, for the others, and also within your teams. This is not labeling anyone or branding anyone like you are like this, you are like that. This just indicates preferences. So you understand that, okay, I tend to respond to certain situations like this. My team, this member tends to respond to this situation like this. So then how do we manage that situation? So very important to understand about yourself. Let me come into what is the impact of conflict in healthcare. So this is from evidence that, so when you look into patient safety, our ultimate aim is the patient, isn't it? Our primary priority is giving the patient care. So what happens when there is a conflict? Conflict in any level, like we are going to talk about conflict within families, conflict between the carers and the providers, and also conflict within the team. So whatever conflict is there, you see that when you look into patient safety, it reveals that patient outcomes are negatively impacted. So our ultimate aim gets impacted very badly. There is a disruption of care, and in one evidence, in a national survey of physicians, almost 2/3 of respondents reported seeing other physicians disrupt patient care at least once a month, and more than 10% of the respondents reported witnessing this kind of a behavior daily. So I'll talk about how behaviors can be, but this is the kind of issues that happen when there is a conflict. And also, we have to understand that conflict is associated with significant cost to the organizations. Whether it is a small NGO or a big institution, conflicts always is associated with significant cost in terms of manpower, resource, financial, everything, because you start losing people, you start, programs get disrupted, you're not able to continue the programs as indicated, and of course the care. So we have to be very careful to understand how conflict actually has an impact on healthcare. So what are the common principles of conflict? This is something we have to understand. So remember that conflict is inevitable. We cannot avoid conflict because we are human beings, because there are relationships. Conflict is inevitable. It will come at some point or other. So it will be present either at an individual level. That is very common, that we have conflicts within ourselves and between people, and also conflict organizationally. So this is inevitable, but the good thing is that the competence to manage conflict can be defined and learned. So we have to understand that we can learn the skills. And what is competence? It is the ability to develop and use cognitive, that is your thoughts, your emotions, and your behavior skills to enhance the outcomes of conflict, but reduce the likelihood of escalation or harm. Remember that if you don't manage conflicts, it will simmer, you'll repress, it will be there in the unit, within yourself, between people, and finally one day it will erupt like a volcano, and it will actually escalate and do much of harm to the whole setting. So the goal is to be competent to have difficult conversations to manage conflict, and active engagement is the way ahead rather than avoidance. So people generally, what do they think? They think, let us not address this, it will automatically get better. Be patient, let things get better on its own. People will do things, and when you work hard, then it will get better. It's all due to good intentions that we avoid, but usually avoidance doesn't actually solve conflicts. Active engagement, but in a very healthy manner, is the way forward. And you also have to be alert of the environment in terms of being neutral, in terms of being safe. And as I said before, self-awareness is very important. What are the causes of conflict? So as we all know, stress is very common, isn't it? It is very, very pervasive. It is also very, what to say, omnipresent. Stress is individual. Again, as I said, stress in the work environment, heavy workload, often poor honesty and poor openness among people in the team, lack of clarity with expectations or guidelines. And I mean this, it's also in terms of providing care. We don't know what the patient expects, what the family expects, what are the guidelines that people follow between interdisciplinary or even between teams. We work with a lot of other professionals providing palliative care. So there's a lack of clarity in terms of lack of discussion between teams. So poor communication, lack of jurisdiction, lack of clarity of roles, who should do what. Very importantly, personality differences. Each of us bring our set of personalities, our set of traits, and that itself can cause interpersonal differences. Conflicts of interest. Why are we doing this? So that is very important. Of course, poor leadership and changes within the organization. These are the, this is a long list, and a lot of things also. So we have to be, very focused in addressing. And what is the behavior? Like I said before, behaviors can be of different types. The most, visible one or the aggressive one is bullying. And this is very common. People can actually bully, saying, don't do this, and also, kind of controlling the environment. Then there is limited communication, not letting people what to do, or what this is especially so between providers and patients and families. Not sharing important information within the team and with patients and families. And this is, we don't see this that much, but it can be there when the bullying or the aggressive behavior leads to verbal or physical violence. We don't see much in our cultural settings, but it can happen. We see violence with patients and families coming up with doctors, providers, when they are not actually seeing, and we are very affected by it, and it goes to legal, and the society itself is affected by it. So I want to first, the PG who sent this case. I'm going to bring up this case for a conflict within the family. Can you unmute yourself and just share this in 1 or 2 minutes?
Yes,
And the
ma'am.
questions also. The questions come in the next slide.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, ma'am. I'll be presenting the case. I'm Dr.
Yeah,
Bhavesh Pangaria, junior resident in Department
yeah.
of Palliative Medicine. It's a case of Mr. X, 25 years old male, resident of Delhi, a case of metastatic Ewing sarcoma. He has now developed metastasis to multiple bones all over the body and lymph nodes, along with DVT in the left lower limb. The patient had left thigh swelling in October 2019, for which he underwent local excision, and histopathology showed was suggestive of Ewing sarcoma. Since then, the patient had 2 lines of chemotherapy, and the latest FDG PET scan shows the progressive nature of the disease. The family of the patient consists of father, mother, and an elder brother, where father is the decision maker and the head of the family. Father and the elder brother have been taking care of the patient, and they have been bringing the patient to the hospital, and also they have been deciding the treatment till now. After the latest scans, there has been a conflict in the family where the father is the of the opinion that the treatment should stop and comfort care should be given as the disease burden is very high. But the elder brother wants to go for further chemotherapeutic treatment and wants to go for if there is any new current regimen or a new treatment on trial if possible for his younger brother.
Okay. Can you continue with the questions?
So the main issues are how would you communicate with the two family members? How would you counsel the family members regarding the current scenario? Also, how would you address Mr. X's anxiety, who doesn't want to hurt either of his father or brother, and he's not also able to take decisions on his own regarding the treatment.
So Bhavish has given us a very common and probably very important case scenario, which we see all of us probably in this meeting would be very familiar with this, where we see this conflict within family members in terms of decision making and how do we communicate with them. Often it causes a lot of issues when we want to start conversation, and how do you address the anxiety. So can we have some discussion in terms of in the chat, and Seema and Raji, if possible, can you take this forward? And I do want to know if people are coming up, especially the MD students, the other group, and also Bhavish, if you can bring in how did you address this in the chat. We might not go this in detail, but I want you all to continue chatting regarding this case scenario. But I'll wait for 1 or 2 minutes to see what is happening in the chat. And if anybody wants to bring in any comment about this, please come. We can wait for 2 minutes for discussion for this. Can we have some comments from the PGs especially? Prarthana, others. Please bring in how would you do it, and other young palliative care physicians. I want you all to bring in your thoughts about this.
Good morning, ma'am.
Yeah,
I'm Pratna speaking.
yeah.
Ma'am, in this situation, it is important first to speak to the father and brother individually to see what are their values and why they want to, what is making them have such different opinions regarding the treatment of the patient.
Yeah.
Then a family meeting maybe
Good.
should be conducted too, so that they can all
Very good.
lay everything down and discuss, have someone should be moderating it so that it is things are situations don't go out of hand, but
Yes.
that way.
Very good.
And I think a
Pratna, I think
separate
that is,
council on each.
yeah, I think that's a good point, and especially the point that you brought is about the family meetings, which I'll bring in later. I will be bringing about the strategies. I'm not talking it for specific case scenarios, but I'm bringing up strategies later. But the important point is to have individual conversations, family meetings, and understand how we address what their values are, what their beliefs are, rather than assuming that because we are meaning well for the person, we have to decide what is correct for them, and also take one person's side that this is what has to be done. So be careful in maintaining a balance, maintaining harmony, and also to address the issues carefully. I'm not going to go into the detail now, but I hope each one of you would start sharing in chat regarding what you would do and your experience, so that Seema and Raji can address in the chat as well. I'm going on to some more experiences that we can have in terms of family. I'm focusing more on the family because that is the root issue that we address, which expands to the providers and later in the team as well. So there could be several aspects in the family in terms of family demands and resources. Like this is one narrative of a daughter sharing how her work experiences coupled with the family's expectations actually fuels conflict. So she says, they told me and my younger sister that we should quit our jobs. This is about her family that she's talking, her larger extended family. She says that they told me that my younger sister and we should quit our jobs, stay home and take care of mother. And they accused me of elder abuse because I wasn't there all the time. So this is very important because this is a person who's working, and she says that she's treated badly because of it, and they are using terms like elder abuse because she's not there all the time. So this is a very important issue that can come up when you start talking to the family. So this is again how you address this daughter's concerns, and also talk to the family, especially how they treat others and how the delegation of responsibilities can happen. who is the primary carer, and of course using terms like elder abuse. This is about families' involvement in care. So this is again another daughter discussing, okay, this can be a son also. I'm not bringing in gender bias here, but this is about discussing how her sister's lack of involvement fuels conflict. So she says, I have a middle sister who's not involved at all. We have tried to get her to do something, and when we say we need your help, she gets angry and have been the brunt of her anger. And I had to say, do you remember your mother has cancer? Do you even know that? So this is about, conflict between two sisters, and one sister being overwhelmed with the responsibilities that she has, and the other person is not avoiding the responsibilities. And this is about facilitating communication between these two people in your meeting with them. And this is about helping both, not taking sides, not thinking that, oh, this daughter is actually doing every work and that daughter is not doing, so we have to address only that person. This is about actually understanding why the other person is not getting involved. See, she must be actually feeling the pressure, must be so distressed that she is avoiding responsibilities. So helping her actually understand that she can have a role which is not too much of a pressure on her, but still help the other daughter who is overwhelmed with the responsibilities. And also to talk to the daughter who's telling us how she can actually delegate responsibilities with others, and how we can also help her to plan her schedule so that she doesn't feel overwhelmed. So this is about actually facilitating communication between two daughters. And this is about role expectations on obligations. So this is a spouse who's sharing how family expectations about roles, about a caregiver fuel conflict. So she says that they feel I should be there 24 hours a day and I shouldn't have a life. And his mom just feels that I should be here all the time with him, because when his father was sick, she was with him. And but she was retired and I'm still working. She had a daughter all the time to help, and I have no one but myself. Well, you were his wife and I am not a slave. See again, see how the terms come. When you are actually when you get angry and when you get stressed and overwhelmed, you use words that you usually don't use. You might use words which can hurt yourself and others. Like remember the elder abuse which came in, and here like saying that I am not a slave. Maybe the mother-in-law doesn't actually mean that, but this person is actually feeling that because the mother-in-law expects. The mother-in-law is so protective about her son. She wants everything to be done for the son, and the wife feels very overwhelmed. So again, this is again talking about two persons in the family who are, related by marriage. So, they feel overwhelmed in a different way other than siblings. So this is again about how responsibilities can be delegated, and about expectations between a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law. Again, very culturally influenced what the society's expectations are, and how we can maintain a balance between the expectations and help them facilitate, communicate between each other and go ahead to provide care to the person, to the son who might be caught between the wife and the mother. So I'm not going to the details, but opening doors, how do we communicate? So when we look into the perspectives of the family, we should understand that. I hope the chat is going on. Seema and Raji and Arun, anything coming up in the chat?
Yes, that people are posting it and we are replying to it also.
Sure. I'm not taking time because we have much to do, and we'll come. Anything important, please note, we can bring it in the last 10 minutes. So the family perspectives are that there are substantial challenges in the family because of the greater variation in family composition. And again, as I said, it is culturally, because in India, in our country, each state, each community will have a different kind of, expectation, and the arrangement, the kinship arrangement will be very different. There'll be patriarchal expectations, there'll be matriarchal domination. So we have to understand all those things, the faith expectations, the increasing complexity of the advanced chronic diseases that we see. When from the beginning to when we are in the journey through with the patient and the family, the complexity and the issues that they present are so different, and each phase brings up its own challenges and issues in the communication within the family and between the provider and the patient. Increasing demands related to symptoms, I don't even need to mention that, because you know that, like pain and every symptom that the disease brings, including psychological symptoms. How do we coordinate care? How do we make decisions? How do we facilitate that? Because especially in end of life care, we know that the all encompassing responsibility as the death comes close, comes nearby, is very, very, stressful and overwhelming for the family. So it is very important that we understand that. And family members, how much ever we educate them from the start, how much ever they educated they are, they read through internet offers so much of, sometimes makes them ill prepared to meet the caregiving demands. So it is ultimately it is an extra amount of work for us during end of life care, and so we as a team should know who should do what, how do we define our roles, what kind of information should be given. So we should have team meetings and discuss about this. And how the family's behavior or how they respond individually, like you'll be talking to one son or one daughter, but how they respond individually and how they respond as a family unit together, and how their needs are met dramatically influences the patient's care quality and well-being. We all know that, but we should know that the distinct family networks, that each family's network is very different, and their lifelong relationships, what they have been exchanging between themselves, the nurturing, the nature of emotional and the relationship that they have shared. The end of life care, or when a disease comes, it is the culmination of all these relationships and family dynamics. So it is very much influenced by the past and the present dynamics, and also the present context and the situation. So it is a combination of all these. So we cannot just make it very black and white and say that your mother is suffering, so you have to take care of this, your mother. Of course, we should facilitate forgiveness. We should facilitate, expression of guilt. We should facilitate a resolution of conflict, of past conflicts. But we should understand all these things, and we should understand that the conflict can be with factors that may or may not be associated with the illness at all. Often we think illness is the most primary thing in the family, but it could be many other factors which can influence the conflict, which is expressed because of the illness. That is what I'm going to say. Because the family structure is the whole house, which you can see in the picture. The illness actually causes disruption. It just breaks the family in the home. Few families are perfectly cohesive. There is no perfect family where everything is like you watch in some movies, that everything is so smooth and happy. There are a lot of hidden tensions which can easily disrupt and erupt during the stress of an illness. But what we do usually is that we label them as dysfunctional or difficult, which is very unfortunate. And then we kind of treat them like that. Rather than that, if we have family meetings like Pratna said, and try to be more open and understand. And this is a model that I want you to, this is David Kissin's model. I have a article which I have given to the MD students regarding this, or this should be in all your palliative care textbooks as well. Read about this, where he talks about a therapy model called family focused grief therapy, where he enables expression of grief in the families. I'll just speak about it later also, just the components of it, but very important that we use these kind of methods to address families. So this is an algorithm which I really found very useful, which I got in an article, which I've again shared to the students. I can share it to others also. So see that this conflict is actually, influenced by the family context, like I said, the conditions and the contributing factors. And then you have consequences. Read about this. I'll just go through this. In the family context, like I said, the historical relationship, family's involvement, the demands and resources structure. Very important, especially in our country, substance, we see in Kerala, this is very rampant, alcohol use, substance use, again, end of life care in terms of advanced care planning, faith, traditions and belief systems, the condition of the patient in terms of the illness, admission to the hospital, whether the patient and the family is really aware of the death and awareness, the absent family, members coming and coming out, death anxiety, perceptions of health, communication constraints, family vying for property, which is very important, and then the conflict, and then the consequences that there is a delayed or restricted care planning, patient wishes are not taken care of, or quality of care is jeopardized, increased distress, severe family relationships and diminished support. And finally, what happens is that we feel that we didn't do well enough for the patient and the family. Please go through this algorithm. This will help you plan it in a structured way. Can I bring in the next person to talk about? So I'm just leaving and going ahead to the next level of conflict, next or another level where it's between providers or the carers and the family. The PG who sent this,
Yes,
can we
ma'am.
just have it
Hello.
in a quick 2 minutes?
Hello.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Good morning, ma'am. I'm
Yeah.
Dr. Kikato from palliative resident from GCRI. It's a case of 51-year-old female, recurrent soft tissue sarcoma of left upper back. She went excision 2 times and received chemotherapy from private hospital. She was admitted under surgical oncology department. They said it was an inoperable disease and transferred for best supportive care to palliative department. She was having severe pain, VAS score of 10 in left upper back, radiating to left upper limb, and also having pain on the left lower limb. She was very anxious, having sleep disturbance, loss of appetite, and tumor was gradually increasing in size, like extending into lateral chest wall and axilla, and which is interrupting with during abduction of her arm, and it causing her great discomfort. Uh, Here, the point of conflict was patient like was demanding like operation constantly, even though the onco surgical doctors have already explained about her condition, the inoperability of the disease condition. And another is patient were constantly demanding for discharge. However, like our palliative care team felt that her pain and other symptoms should be optimized, like adequately controlled. Even though it's not a curative intent, still we could do something before giving her a discharge against her wishes. So that was the point.
Can you just
Thank
bring
you.
in one important question that you want to ask the others? What do you want to ask
Yes,
others?
yes. How do we like as a palliative care physician, even though it's a curative, not a curative, still symptomatic. But how can we know that we can relieve like the symptom and other thing, relieve the patient from our suffering at least to some extent, but patient wants to get discharged. So how can we convince against her discharge and continue to give an indoor treatment? And another is patient has already been explained about the inoperability of the disease status, but still demanding for the surgery. So how to go for it?
Very important issues that you have pointed out. I want people to come out with questions and answers in the chat, please, because this is also an ethical dilemma, isn't it? Like, actually, if the patient is demanding, it's about autonomy also, and then how do
Yes,
you
ma'am.
actually explain between benefit and futility regarding this surgery? So it's very important that you bring in those principles also and use your basic communication skills and actually establish that rapport and bring in this balance. And also probably you will have to again have a family meeting. So when we are talking about difficult communication due to conflict at different levels, you have to actually incorporate all this. So here also you will have to bring in the family and use all those. So in this case also you will have some conflict within family members. So we cannot treat everything differently. We'll have to merge everything together and do it together. Can we have just 1 minute and go to the chat, Seema and Raji, anything that is coming up to this case, and can we have one kind of input to this?
So Aloka Dalal has asked, 51-year-old female, what is the family dynamics? Anyone else involved?
Yes,
Yes,
only
that is
her
very important to look into it.
yes, ma'am. Only her
Yeah,
husband
please
was
go
a
ahead.
caretaker. Yes, only her husband was with her. They came from a far place, from a very far place, from a distant village. So only husband and she were there.
We are not going into solving this scenario now, but it is just to kind of give you insights or give us insights about how do we go about it, to have family meetings. Probably, like he said, is there actually only one carer they're coming from? So how do we help him also? How do we make it much more, have a meeting where we can make the decision much more easier, facilitate communication, help they give some insight to the patient, look at the ethical dilemma, and help our team also take the best decision for both, for us and for themselves. So I'm going into the conflict with the providers and carers. So remember that usually it arises from the families. That is why I said that we cannot see this as one silo. It merges between each other. But from the carers, we should be very careful about how families approach. Please, though we said that basic communication is not being addressed now, we assume that all of us know about basic communication completely. We should be thorough. We should keep looking at it. We should get feedback. We should get supervised. Keep looking at your basic communication skills. Do not assume that we have learned it, so we will do it well all the time. Even when you're the most senior, we should keep looking at it because we make mistakes all the time. So keep looking at it, align with the agenda of the family, understand the issues. And also, please look into complex issues within ourselves. We have complex emotional issues. We have our own beliefs. We have our own assumptions. We can impose that unknowingly on the families and the patient. So let us look into that also. So this is just examples. I'm not going to the detail. This is from a study that I looked into. So when there is a family meeting, this is how physicians actually responded. See, they say that there is an emotional distancing before the meeting because there is, they want to do that because they don't want to really get over involved with the patient. There is anticipatory anxiety before all meetings. I'm nervous and apprehensive, burdened by the weight of the huge decisions made. Remember, all these also influence how we conduct the family meeting. After meetings in which there is a conflict, there is sadness and regret. There is a sensation of being drained because family meetings usually don't go exactly the way it is planned. There is frustration, there is anxiety, and when there is a successful meeting, there is satisfaction and relief. I'm just telling you that we also go through all this and read through these narratives so that we understand how to go through this. And if it is of one of sadness and regret and you feel drained, please delegate another team member, have another team meeting, take another opportunity to address. Do not give up. This is another algorithm which is very, very useful. Look at I'll come back to this later. Beneath, I'm talking about the physician's emotional. See, look at the physician's emotional responses, which are very important. So how do we maintain realistic hope when you are actually also practicing a bit of emotional distancing? How do you have the approaches and tending to family? We will look into when we are talking about strategies. So you have an algorithm here. You can follow this. This is the third case scenario. Pratana, can you quickly go through this? Because we have only 15 minutes more. I want to just go through the strategies also. Just give the salient points. I don't want you to go through the whole case scenario. Just give the salient points.
Ma'am, okay, good morning, everyone. Mr. Shivam is a 30-year-old male from Jharkhand, and he is cachectic fragile, and he has received chemotherapy and has a lot of side effects of the chemotherapy. So the palliative team was consulted for early pal care, and the counselor has spoken to him, and they have identified a lot of psychosocial issues in the patient, and he is also very anxious about his condition deteriorating, and he wants to go back to his family in his hometown, whereas the medical oncologist wants to continue his treatment. So there is a conflict between the palliative care team and the medical oncology team regarding the further management of this patient, as in so how would we communicate with the medical oncologist regarding reconsidering aggressively managing Mr. Shivam, and how would you address Mr. Shivam's anxiety?
Another important point pointed out by Pratna, this is a very common scenario that we see, especially when we want to, help people accept the palliative care principles, and when there is aggressive management and when this happens. I hope chat brings in discussion about this also. So I'm just going into the strategies that we can adopt regarding this. So what can one do? We have to adopt certain strategies to go ahead. The most important thing is, as I said, is the necessary communication skills, which actually results in improvement in the habits of confronting difficult issues. But we should also remember that training does not reduce occurrence of conflict. Remember, I said conflict is inevitable and it has an impact, but communication training can have an impact on how conflict is perceived and how you can mitigate this. I'm bringing in some concepts called crucial conversations and crucial confrontations. That is, a crucial conversation is defined as a discussion between two or more people when the stakes are high. This can be between anyone, between individuals, between organization members, between providers and the family members, where opinions vary and emotions run strong. And confrontation is face-to-face conversations where someone is held accountable. So it's more individual in this. And this is very important to use these two kind of approaches when you want to address conflict. And when you start conversing, you have to have a story. You also have to be prepared and you have to master the story. So when you speak, when you're angry, look at this quote. You will make the best speech, but you will regret that. So when you're angry, don't carry on conversations. So how do you master your story? You have to be prepared in terms of whether you want to address the conflict or not. What is the nature of conflict? What is the content of the conflict? Especially the values. The values what the other people also have. What is the pattern? Is there a pattern, especially within the team? If it is a team, what is the pattern? Whether it is affecting relationships, and if you're going to respond to the conflict, are you over-personalizing it? That is, are you making it your issue or are you making an issue for the cause? Look at your own position in this. What is your position in this? When I'm saying your, I'm not talking about you as a person, but as maybe you're a leader, maybe you're a carer, or you're a social worker, a doctor, or a nurse, or whatever you are. And also, what is your awareness of what is desired? What do you want from this conversation? This is very important, and this is the structure you have to follow when you're managing a conflict. And also understand the intensity of the conflict. Again, the greatest remedy for anger is delay. If you're angry, if you feel emotionally overwhelmed, delay the conversations, choose another time. Because there is an intensity of conflict from differences to polarization. This is actually a graded kind of intensity. Differences, all of us have differences of opinion about things. But when we have only differences, we know that the other person has a difference of opinion, we respect it, but we agree to work together. Whereas the highest is polarization, where we are polarized into groups because of the differences we have, and we work against each other. So that is the grades. Differences leading to misunderstanding, leading to disagreements, leading to discord, which is actually visible conflict, and then polarization. So you understand the intensity of conflict also when you are going to address conflict. Reflection on yourself could be about reframing or cognitive reappraisal. Looking at, if you have some issue within your mind, look at alternative perspectives and outcomes of the situation. Reframe it in a different, generally positive light. Have centering and mindfulness help you look at it without overwhelming yourself with emotions of anger and hostility, and think of the overall cause and the values for why you are here in this role, and look at it in a very slightly emotionally detached manner, and look at mindfulness for the moment, what you have to do. This is again a model which you can follow in terms of how you would communicate. Here you also have your basic communication skills happening. This is a valued conflict model. Please read into this also. So you validate. Wherever the level of conflict is, you can validate, you can ask open-ended questions to know more about it, listen to test assumptions from your side and their side, uncover the interest, that means explore options and decide on solutions. Use your 4 main listening skills like asking, mirroring, that means repetition of what they say to understand more, reframing or paraphrasing, and priming. And the 4 R's of conflict management, or that is, like I said, you remember, recognize, respond with respect, resolve and manage, and reflect. If you follow this model, I think we can manage conflict very well. Family meetings, like Prathana said, very important. So to have a family genogram, ask your team to draw in a genogram about the family's structure, constructing a narrative based on family history, like what has been the issues. So you have a story of the family, depending on their past also, how has their history been, so that you can contextualize their present concerns. This actually helps both as a therapeutic tool and as a data gathering exercise. And this is what I meant as FFGT. This is an important therapeutic exercise which involves engagement with the family. This also has a family genogram. You look into relations between the family members, the identity of the family, what is their role, and the focus of therapy. When you do all these first steps, you know what your therapy should focus on. So if you can look into family meeting, how this family focus group therapy should be conducted. If you can have some expert have some sessions on this, this will be very useful to address conflict in terms of family. So what I want to mention is that peace is actually not absence of conflict, but the presence of creative alternatives for responding to conflict. So when we get into conflict, we tend to gravitate towards a particular mode for handling it. There is no best mode. And the way we handle conflict will be very influenced by the type of conflict. So understanding our preferences and adapting can help manage conflict. So self-awareness, as I mentioned, I'm going into tool right now. So I'm going to talk about, there are many tools like the Crable Conflict Style Inventory, the Thomas Gilman Conflict Mode Instrument, and there is a tool for nurses called the Nurse Conflict Style. I'm going to talk about Thomas Gilman Conflict Mode Instrument. So look into this. This is the last few slides. This is about 2 factors which strongly shape our choice of conflict style. So this is about how hard we push for the things we want. What is our agenda? That is our focus on our own agenda high, or is our focus on our own agenda low? This is like an arrow. Where are we in this arrow? The other agenda is the focus on relationships. How much attention are we going to give it to the relation? Is the focus on relationship high or low? So in every conflict, this is going to happen on our agenda and on our relationship. And there is 5 styles of responding, and each has a specific focus and strength and weakness. That is, the style of responding is, one is directing, cooperating, compromising, avoiding, and harmonizing. I'll give you examples. So when it is about directing, our focus is more on, see, there is a low focus on relationship and high focus on agenda. That is, you're directing or trying to control. So I win and you lose. So how is it? You assert, you control, you compete. You insist, you demand, and you defeat. So you're saying, we are doing it my way, let us get the job done and worry about the relationship later. The opposite is harmonizing, where you're saying the high focus on relationship and low focus on your agenda. You're saying, I'm very flexible. Whatever you do, whatever you say, I'm happy, which is fine with me. There, your focus on agenda is low, your focus on relationship high. You're saying, I'm ready to lose, let you win. I agree, I go along, I give in, I affirm. This is good, but this is also not very good. There should be a balance between this. The third is avoiding, where there is a low focus on relationship and low focus on agenda, because you're so overwhelmed. You want to say, I don't want to get into this. I lose and you lose. You withdraw, you remain silent, you walk away, you postpone discussion, and you delay responding. You're saying, let me get out of here, I don't want to talk about it. Conflict, is there a conflict? I don't want to talk about it. And this is cooperating, where there is high focus on both. High focus on agenda and relationship. You're saying, I win and you win. This is very good. You're saying, let us have a dialogue. Let us agree to talk things. Assert yourself but support the other. This is one of the best models you can have. You're saying, let's talk to this. My preference is this, and I want to hear yours and understand yours. And the last is a compromising, where you're saying, there is a medium focus on relationship and medium focus. We both win some and we both lose some. This is also, you're saying, let us negotiate. Let us strike a deal and find little for something. So you're saying that, see, let us accept half of what we want and we can get an agreement and move on. This is a very good model which we can actually train ourselves. And this is actually very good for individual conflicts. This is good within teams. This is good within organizations, and very good for taking care of families. So these are the 5 styles of responding conflicts which you can use very effectively. See, when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail and you want to hammer on it. Let us have a tool which is valuable and essential for particular situations. we can handle conflict better when we're equally skilled in all. Not saying this is the best. We have to use each one. We can use a mix of everyone and have a very good balanced way of approaching to bring in a good outcome. Learn the strengths and weaknesses of each style. Grow by experimenting with greater use. This is available. You have to just, if you want to get trained, you have to pay a bit of money, but you can have training on this. And it is very useful. Many of us who have done leadership courses have been trained on this. It's very useful to do this, to understand, to become self-aware, and to address conflicts. So directing is about quick decision for emergency, that is very good, and it brings the core values. Cooperating is saying that relationship is important, issues are meaningful, and we have time. Compromising is that we have limited time but temporary solutions only. Harmonizing is, harmony is very important in a team, that you have harmony. Relationship is important, and only my agenda is not important. Avoid responding relationship. Sometimes only when there is very great harm, you use avoiding, not a very healthy response. What I would say is, don't waste a crisis. Use it very well to bring an effective outcome and manage the crisis well, and good outcomes will come out of it. These are the references, and we have around a few minutes, and stop sharing this to have some discussion. Seema, and anything that you want to point out, and then we can have one or two questions. If I can go for a few minutes more, Dr. Sushma.
You can go, Chitra, because it is an important topic, and you are doing. You have covered a lot, and I think there will be a discussion. Arun must have gathered all the important questions. So first, Seema will summarize or give her comments, and then Arun, please speak about the questions.
Yeah, sure. Seema madam, I'll give it up.
Seema, Raji, anything you want to point out, please?
Excellent presentation, Chitra. I think it's been very holistic, covered a lot of aspects. I mean, really, it has opened a lot of eyes, I guess, about a lot of things that we were not aware of. There was one question, however, which stood out in terms of, is there any places where you do not address a conflict? You know, that one question was there, a post on the chat.
It's very difficult to answer that, Seema. It's not very, there is no, like I say, a black and white answer to this. I can't say that this situation demands this. Again, it is about balancing all this. And if you think that, and it is very individual also. See, if you think that your relationship will completely kind of, if I think that, suppose it's between two individuals, okay. If I think if I address this relationship will just disintegrate, and I don't want that to happen, I might use avoiding for a short period of time. I'm not saying forever, okay? Do you understand? So sometimes avoiding can be used as a temporary, very minor kind of thing for a short period of time to let everybody have some kind of time to reflect. Sometimes it will be very emotionally overwhelmed, or you will be very angry sometimes. At that point, you avoid and you take time to reflect and then come back. Is that clear?
Yes.
But I don't think it is. It's a good approach for a sustained response is not good avoiding, because then you're not actually addressing, and that will kind of simmer, and you will be repressing it, and that it will come again. It will show up in different other aspects of your relationship.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you, Chitra. Over to you, Arun.
Yeah. Raji, anything from your side, Raji?
Vijay was commenting to achieve good symptom control, so that is with respect to that 51-year-old woman who was insisting on surgery. So Vijay was commenting whether to achieve good symptom control initially, so that she will settle with respect to symptom control, and
I think that is the way. So that is what you do in your meeting with her, that you try to negotiate with her, saying that maybe we can actually offer you better symptom control, so that you know that is possible and you don't have to actually take up the surgery. So that is another issue. That is the issue which comes in your meeting with her. But the first step is that you actually negotiate with her, you actually improve your communication, you facilitate that, and bring out these points so that you discuss, so that you give her insight that this is possible. You don't actually have to go for surgery. Hello.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I was just looking at the chat column, and there were many questions as per the cases were discussed, and Dr. Seema and Dr. Raji did answer a lot of questions, and there are also solutions or discussion points that the participants are also putting in the chat. It's not that
Very
they're
good.
also, yeah, they're
Very
asking only questions. So okay, so Dr. Nagesh has just pointed out that discussing anything when a person is in pain may not get the desired result. So maybe we should.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I didn't go into the details of how you do it or whether symptoms should be controlled, because I assume that we already know that. What I'm trying to say is, what do we do when we are in conflict? Despite all these things, what do we do? Then again, we have to reflect, we have to be aware of what we are doing, and then facilitate communication.
Okay, and a lot
But
of
use these, what I'm thinking, what I'm saying is, we are not actually aware of these kind of tools in our practice. Please be aware of these tools. Use those for training in your, in your individual training sessions also. So we can do training for you in your, when, if you call us, if regarding, MBTI, regarding self-awareness, regarding learning styles, regarding conflict managing styles. These are all important because this improves the way you look at yourself. I think ultimately it's about how you look at yourself, because if you understand yourself, you will understand another person better.
yeah, thank you. So
I think I answered Anju, Dr. Anju, in that. How
yeah,
can we improve our self? I think, start looking at it, Dr. Anju, and then we can actually, if you use the tools well, if you use your team well in terms of supervision, feedback, you will actually improve. The first step is actually to understand that there is something we should look into ourselves and reflect and also address it. People generally, what happens in our relationship is that when there is an issue, we actually project it to outside factors. We never think that it could be due to myself. Remember that we can never change another person, we can change only ourselves.
interesting point of discussion was here that what model to follow. Is there a particular model that we should follow while doing resolution of conflicts, or
There's one model that I showed you about the styles. If you can use, it's a very simple model. You go through it. It's very, and if you reflect on yourself, we use these styles very commonly in our life. We avoid, we unnecessarily harmonize sometimes, because we sometimes think that I don't have the energy to do this, so let us say yes to everything, or sometimes we control the situation too much when we are in a position of power. How do we change that, or how do we recognize the preferences that we hold, and how we bring in a balance of the styles?
okay? The rest of the comments are
If you need a just one session on conflict management using a model, we can plan that also.
great. The rest of the comments are mostly about reflective practice and congratulating for the presentation.
Okay. I think it's time now, 7:30. Anything else that anyone wants to say? Then otherwise, Dr. Sushma, you
I
can.
want to say, Chitra, first of all, congratulations. It was such a well covered topic. So
Thank you,
many
ma'am.
things. I think you started with the conflict between family members, and then physician and patient,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
finally two physicians. And you have covered very well with evidence that these are the models available, so, and many things to learn, and many you have given a lot of homework to the PGs. I think it was fantastic. I just want to cover that question which Seema has asked from somebody, that when we should not address the conflict. I think with my own experience, I can say that if you think that this conflict can be postponed, as Dr. Chitra has already mentioned, that if today we can postpone this, please postpone. Second point is, first you understand the situation which Dr. Chitra has narrated since beginning, that you have to be very, very 100% sure that what you are thinking is correct about the situation. Second thing, third thing, which you have already said, that you should not you cannot be right always. So you
Yeah.
have to be 100% sure that you are not imposing what you are thinking about this. So this, keeping these two important principles in your mind, what you should do, if this conflict is going to hamper or going to damage some kind of a practice in your department or amongst your caregivers hugely, you have to address that conflict. And what you will do, you will have a small meetings at a different levels where the conflicts are happening, and then come out with a large meeting, come out with a solution. It's not necessary to address conflicts immediately, but it is necessary if it is damaging a patient care or departmental
Yes.
services or
Very true.
protocols and policies. So we have to address that, but not immediately. You have to have a small meetings where the conflicts are arising, come out with a conclusion amongst yourself, and then have a larger group meeting and sort out the problem. Otherwise, if you will not sort out that problem, it will become a big problem, and your whatever practice you have originated or developed, it will damage the practice. So it is important sometime to 100%. You're so overwhelmed why this problem has come and I have to solve this problem. But first understand yourself and then try to solve the problem. If it is damaging hugely your department, your patient care, or an individual patient, definitely. Thank you, Chitra.
Yeah. I think those slides, like Madam said, remember those slides I said where there is, mastering your own story. That is very important in terms of you be prepared and whether to address it or not and all those things. The intensity of conflict. Remember that you can have differences within the team. Respect it and try to go on respecting each other. Only when it becomes polarized and when there is, like the discord, then it becomes very overwhelming. So differences we should respect, and we'll get along very well if you learn to respect differences. So mastering your story, look at the intensity of the conflict, and remember, why do we address it? Like whether it is affecting the overall goal of our team. What are we here for? We are here to take care of people. So remember, why do we need to take care of the conflict?
So thank you very much, Chitra. Everyone, please
Thank you.
keep on managing your conflicts between your patients. And in this COVID era, there are a lot of conflicts are coming in these days. Every day there is a story, but keep yourself safe and manage conflicts with the way Dr. Chitra has explained beautifully well. I think, Chitra, a lot of points to learn today from your today's presentation, and I think MDs will definitely be benefited hugely by your presentation. Thank you very much, Chitra.
Thank you.
Next
Thank
will
you
be
so much.
Dr. Nagesh will speak on another aspect of communication. Thank you, Nisha, and thank you, Arun and Anuja.